All right. So it is my pleasure to welcome back to these briefings Mahmoud Mohieldin, the SG Special Envoy on financing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and to welcome for the first time Leila Fourie, the CEO of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. They are here to brief you about this morning's meeting in which the Secretary General took part, the Global Investors for Sustainable Development Alliance. So I don't know which one of you will go first, but whichever one can just open their mics and go ahead and start.
Right. Thank you so much. I'm happy to start. Just coordinated with Leila on that.
Thank you, Mahmoud.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. Many thanks for all of you. I'm following up the update on this extraordinary meeting convened by the Secretary General, and the sessions were chaired by the Special Envoy Mark Carney, and the two co-chairs and the leaders of the GISD Alliance were all in this important meeting. Just an update on the information of the GISD Alliance. It's a UN first of its kind grouping of business leaders from all over the world. They have joined force to rapidly and significantly support the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, providing solutions from the private sector investment perspective. They have been doing good work since they start convening back in October, and I'll leave that to Leila to elaborate on. So the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the global context of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The global economy is tumbling, facing the biggest and deepest recession since the global depression. Unemployment rates have been rising, inequality has been rising, public debt is mounting, and there is a serious risk that we will not achieve the Sustainable Development Goals on time because of the crisis. The UN has been working closely with all actors to tackle the socioeconomic impact of the pandemic. And today, the Secretary General convened the Global Investors for Sustainable Development, GISD Alliance, for an extraordinary meeting with 4 specific objectives. First, to identify the risks and opportunities posed by COVID-19 for the SDGs. Second, to develop solutions to align the response and recovery measures with the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Third, to rethink business models and reshape the partnership between the public and the private sector for the achievement of the SDGs. And 4, to advance actions by the GISD Alliance to scale up finance and investment for sustainable development for the post-COVID-19 world. I followed the discussion. I think there had been a great deal of support of different initiatives. What comes to mind, and here I'm speaking freely, not quoting the Secretary General, there had been a great deal of emphasis on inequality. Yes, we are facing a storm, almost a perfect storm, or even a perfect storm, but we are not in the same boat. Because of inequality, different countries have different capacities to handle the implications of COVID-19. And even within these separate boats, people are facing a great deal of inequality. So the exposure and the way that they are dealing with the challenges of COVID-19 is different. And the Secretary General, and here I quote him, he made it very clear that have we invested more and earlier in the Sustainable Development Goals, would be in a much better position to withstand the COVID-19 pandemic shock. He is calling on the GISD Alliance and its partnerships around the world to support the recovery and response. And here there is a great deal of work that could be summarized with the three aspects of work, starting with the R letter. So on reporting, on the identification of risk, and the identification of return of investments. On reporting, I think there have been some good discussion on alignment of reporting with the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. On risk, matters related to environment and climate had to be better identified and factored in. And return, as mentioned again by the Secretary General, the return shouldn't be just the financial returns to the shareholders, but the overall return to society and better alignment of the economic value with the social value. And finally, there had been a good agreement on the next steps. 6 specific steps were identified. 1, urging the broader business sector to integrate the SDGs into core business practices. 2nd, scaling up sustainable investments globally, especially to countries most in need. 3rd, aligning investments with sustainable development objectives. 4, advocating for a coordinated international approach to financial regulation. 5, encouraging rating agencies to better incorporate sustainable development into decision-making. And finally, advancing internationalization of key externalities, such as pricing in carbon emissions. And this is all in good implementation of the Paris Agreement. Without saying more, I like, with the permission of Steph, to ask the co-chair of the GISD Alliance, Madam Leila Fourie, the CEO of Johannesburg Stock Exchange, to take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mahmoud. Leila, please, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mahmoud, and good day to everybody. In my part of the country, it's good evening. I'd like to just firstly say that we had an extraordinary meeting today outside of our normal cycle, and extraordinary times call for extraordinary action. The United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was envisaged as very much a blueprint for a better world, a kinder, a fairer, and a more just world. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us unequivocally just how critical this is, as well as how urgent it is. The coronavirus is more than an epidemiological contagion. It's an economic one, and an economic one that has potentially catastrophic consequences for the 2030 Agenda and indeed for our dreams of a sustainable world. I'm personally very honored to be the co-chair of the Global Investor Sustainable Development Alliance, which was convened by the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, last October in a bid to galvanize business. And that was really designed to pivot us towards long-term sustainable development and away from short-termism with its attendant volatility and the inherent risks, especially for the developing world, which is where I'm from. So this is indeed a deep honor that I hold dear to my heart, as I do, coming from a country with the highest Gini coefficient, but also in leading the stock exchange with a very proud record of innovating in the field of sustainable development investment, and an exchange which has done a lot in our own local markets to alleviate the worst effects of the pandemic locally. Today, as Mahmoud said, the GISD Alliance met at the Secretary General's behest for an extraordinary meeting, and as I said earlier, in these very extraordinary times. We reiterate and we reaffirm our commitment to supporting the UN to fund its sustainable development goals, and we are all united in being determined to continue to transform the finance and investing world on this trajectory towards sustainable development. We are committed to make the post-COVID-19 economy more sustainable and resilient to external shocks, especially climate-related shocks. And we will act within our companies and within our interests and in partnership with public actors to enable a robust and global response and a recovery that is aligned to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We've resolved to implement a number of actions. Mahmoud had spoken about those, and I'll just repeat a couple of them for a reminder. Scaling up of sustainable investments globally, and especially in those countries of need, because we do acknowledge that there is an uneven level of poverty and ability to respond. And as Mahmoud said, it's really about urging the broader business sector to better integrate the SDGs into core business models. And we heard from a number of the CEOs examples of how they had done this. Aligning the investment with sustainable development objectives, advancing internalization of key externalities, and coordinating efforts with regulatory bodies and policymakers on these relevant matters. And so it is crucial that the various stakeholders and players across business, government, and civil society and organizations like the UN come together to find common ground and to take strong action if we are to see the progress and the momentum that we need to see to achieve the SDGs. There were a number of steps that were taken by individual GISD members, and these include, just by way of example, the issuance of COVID-19 bonds across a number of countries. My colleague, Mr. Fourie, who is the CEO of Investec, and I have supported the South African president, who announced recently that he and his cabinet will be donating 33% of their salaries for 3 months towards a COVID-related response fund. Both the two CEOs, myself and Fourie, who are part of the GISD, have made that commitment. The Stock Exchange Board has made that commitment, and a number of important and large corporate organizations have made similar commitments. So this is really for us very much about making a personal commitment in support of this collective solidarity that we are all committing to in achieving sustainability. In addition to this, there are a number of initiatives framing investment tools, instruments, and platforms to facilitate sustainable development to countries and to sectors that are most in need. And this really highlighted, the discussions today highlighted an African proverb which is so well known on our continent, and that is that if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. It's the African way, it's the way of Ubuntu and the way of humanity. And there was a general consensus across all of these very high-powered and senior executives and captains of industry that this is our moment and this is our opportunity, and we are jointly determined not to be found wanting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I will go to Edie Letter for the UN Correspondents Association. Edie? Go ahead, Edie.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, thank you very much for doing this briefing. In a world where a lot of countries are scrambling to find funds to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, and are trying to figure out their budgets, how realistic is it to think that the 2030 goals in any way can be achieved?
Do you want to go ahead and take that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for this important question. I think, if anything, this crisis reminded us of the cost of not taking the SDGs seriously. Only one of them, SDG 3, about health and lack of investments in it, in preparedness, is very much responsible for this kind of great deal of discrepancy of response to the health shock. So I think it's a good way of reminding us of taking the serious investments we require to achieve the SDGs. Investments in health and education and the human capital, investments in infrastructure, including digital solutions, and investment in resilience, including climate. Where that money will be coming from? Resourceful countries like OECD countries manage really to increase the support by governments. We have seen that many of them had been spending more than 10% of GDP. For the countries that are fiscally and budget constrained, they need the help. They need the external finance help, and they need as well better solutions with innovation of the kind that Leila just mentioned, that could be really taking care of the public-private partnership to bridge the gaps of finance and raise capital to support budgets. Budgets are constrained normally in these difficult times, but there are opportunities to scale up on some of the good discussions that have been put forward, and some proposals as well with concrete pipelines of projects. I think this is a golden opportunity to put the Finance for Development framework as agreed upon in July in Addis into action, getting the public with the private sector and the domestic with the external finance, and put that into priority areas as had been realized during the last few months.
Thank you. Ms. Fourie, would you like to add something?
Yes, I'm very happy. So I think that I just wanted to reiterate what was said, and really just to say that, while the amount that's required to fund these sustainable development goals is extraordinary, what is required is a realigning of the existing resources and investment and reallocation. And what I've certainly seen on the ground in Africa and in South Africa is that there is a greater, because the COVID crisis has brought into sharper relief the existing fault lines of inequality and climate change, where we've directly seen not only the effects of the health pandemic on our health system, but also the effects of the lockdown so visibly in climate, the impact on pollution. For example, penguins walking through the city of Cape Town. These visual images are very powerful reminders and very powerful and persuasive indicators of where funding needs to be allocated. And for the first time in my working career, I've seen a genuine collaboration between public and private sector, and a willingness by big business to make a real contribution from the bottom up on social elements that are so vital to rebuilding the economy. And so I am hopeful that this crisis has rather ironically created a catalyst for change and a commitment and a solidarity towards a common goal that perhaps was not as powerful and not as present in the pre-COVID world.
Thank you. Toby, NHK, you had a question.
Hi there. Thank you very much for this briefing. I just wanted to ask for a few additional examples of the externalities that you mentioned, and being able to price them into a market setting in a meaningful way, such as carbon emissions priced into energy effects. And I think you mentioned something about ratings agencies as well. But if you could provide a few more examples of that, it'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Mahmoud, do you want to go, Ms. Fourie?
Well, Leila can go first, and then I'll complement it.
Okay.
So there are a number of initiatives, as you so rightly said, for example, the pricing in of emissions into deals. What we are seeing is the restructuring of products around these various different goals. So, for example, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, I can speak for my own personal circumstances, have recently launched sustainability and social bonds. And the idea here is that these will be used genuinely to raise funds through the debt market for worthy causes. We already had green bonds out in the market, and those have been well subscribed to. We have also, as part of the work in our working groups, created a sustainable development definition. Now, the importance of creating one common definition is there to avoid, for example, greenwashing, and to ensure that embedded and internalized in the assessment of a company's sustainable development credentials, you have a common frame of reference that you can compare from company to company. And so this is a really important way to codify and to create a shared understanding and a workable definition, so that investment funds can be appropriately assessed across a common framework.
Thank you. Mahmoud?
Right. Let me add to that in 3 areas of work. First, on reporting. We have seen very positive evolution of reporting, from voluntary reporting to better alignment, and now to some jurisdictions and some companies are willing really to engage in mandatory disclosure when it comes to environment and climate. That will take care of data, evidence, factoring in externalities in a meaningful way, and it will avoid this problem mentioned by Leila related to climate change, investment washing, or SDG washing, or greenwashing. We need better disclosure and better data. Second, to your point about rating agencies, and I would like as well to add the auditing firms, the big 4. During the last couple of years, we have seen great deal of investments in the capacities of the rating agencies and the auditors to make them able to monitor the progress of corporates and business in the 2 sides of financial and non-financial firms. And this becoming really a big growing line of business, especially when we see the increase of companies, firms, financial and non-financial, on their embracing of the SDG and sustainability rules. Third, as mentioned in today's discussion, it's better to take the whole thing in a more integrated financial framework. It is not about few transactions in some cities or by some companies. It's basically about how to make matters better coordinated, to avoid discrepancy and to avoid unnecessary negative arbitrage. If you have some discipline in some area and lack of discipline in another. So I think that well-coordinated approach, as discussed today, could really pave a good way of harmonizing the work, coordinating the work, and getting us all aligned behind the response and recovery, and getting the financial sector and investments closer to the real economy, getting, as they call it here in the United States, bridging the gaps between Wall Street as a proxy of all of the markets and the Main Street as a proxy of the real activity where it really matters.
Just one follow-up. Are you supporting any specific divestments?
Mahmoud?
Can you explain that? Specific divestments in what area?
in not investing in specific industries that are harmful to the environment?
Yes, there have been very well-established rules about not just the positive list linking the investments to the SDGs and the 2030 agenda, but there is a great deal as well of filtering what should be negative, with negative implication when it comes to pollution, emissions, causing harm to the environment or climate. One of the good examples that I'm familiar with is the SDG equity-linked bonds that had the 3 filters. First filter is causing no harm and prevention of harm. That goes into different areas, from matters that could be harmful to the people or to the planet, or cause any kind of issues, including matters related to violence or having health hazard. The first filter. The second filter is the positive one, when you link your investment and investment opportunities to the positive list, and it's a broad list because the 2030 agenda is really broad when you get that into different aspects of human capital to infrastructure to climate and beyond. And then we are reminded that these are investments that should really be working as well to make profits, not just for the shareholders, but for the stakeholders at the same time. So through these 3 filters, you can really see that there are some positive incentives and there are negative incentives when it comes to these kind of designs of financial instruments. Leila, would you like to add anything to that?
Not explicitly, just to say that we do, within our sustainable development investment definition, have identified negative screening as a component. So within the investment strategies, we have negative screening, we've got ESG integration and engagement, positive best-in-class screening, sustainability themed. And the negative screening involves the exclusion of activities or industries with clearly defined negative impacts from an investment portfolio. And in that, as an example, is arms. I think what will naturally occur once we have a more broader common definition and standard at a more detailed level that is uniformly applied is that you will see organizations naturally negative investing by virtue of the fact that they're removing funds from certain organization and funneling or channeling them towards those organizations that have proven quantitatively their sustainability credentials.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll go to Dan Thomas.
Can I just finally
go ahead.
Mention something that the Secretary General mentioned today about this issue of factoring in the environmental and social impacts, and he emphasized that several times in his speech, and he said clearly that he's expecting good.
Didn't give it consideration. I said, I'm so sorry.
Good partnership with the GISD Alliance, and he said that this is the objective with Special Envoy Mark Carney, to ensure every financial decision takes account of environmental and social impacts. My attire,
I stole.
Great. Thank you very much.
It was really cloudy before.
If there are any other questions, we will let Ms. Fourie and Mahmoud leave. So thank you, both of you, for coming on. We hope to get updates regularly of this process. So thank you. And now